Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Beth and I am the Bookworm Tray. And today I am bringing you a tag, and it is the School Days book tag, originally created by What Victoria Read. I was tagged to do this video by my friend Sylvie at the diaries. I don't know why I'm doing that, so I guess I will put something there. So please go and check her channel out if you haven't already. It is the hottest day here in the UK, so I am trying to bring the energy, but honestly, I'm just a sweaty mess right now, so bear with me. So the first question is, first bell, tell us about the book that got you into reading. So I have always been a reader. I grew up in a household full of readers. My mum always read to me as a child. So I don't really remember one specific book that got me into reading. I think the first books that I remember really reading and really having a really strong reaction to would either be the Worst Witch series. I was obsessed with these books. I'd actually quite like to reread them at some point. I want to see if they're still that high quality middle grade. This is a series that follows a girl called Mildred. I forget her surname. It's either Hubble or Hubbard. I think it's Hubble. And she is a witch, and it follows her as she joins this witch school. Mildred isn't a very talented witch, unfortunately, so she gets into all kinds of trouble at school, and there's a really strict teacher, and there's a girl called Ethel Hallow who's a teacher's pet, and I don't know why, but I just really loved her character as a kid. I wasn't a teacher's pet. I was kind of naughty, kind of not naughty, a bit cheeky. So I don't know why I loved her character so much, but I did. And then the other book that I remember having a really strong reaction to, possibly more so than The Worst Witch, was the book What Katie Did, which is a children's classic. I read a lot of classics as a child. This is about a girl called Katie who is, I believe, the oldest sibling of lots of other kids. I was the oldest, and Katie was also very bossy. She had this really big character, and I think I just saw a lot of my own personality in Katie. Katie's quite naughty as well, not bad, but mischievous. And Katie ends up getting into an accident and breaks her back, and she ends up being bedridden for a very long period of time. I don't remember exactly how long. And over that time we see Katie mature from this loud, bossy child into this mature and sensitive young woman. I have read this book so many times. I just related so much to Katie. I just wanted to be exactly like her. I just loved all the little things that her and her family would do. So probably that is the book that got me into reading more so than The Worst Witch, if I'm being honest. But I really loved The Worst Witch as well. So the next question is break time. What is the book that you've most recently had to take a break from or DNF? This is quite hard because I have actually DNF a lot of books recently, / taken a break from a lot of books recently. I haven't actually been reading complete books. I also haven't been tracking my reading, so I can't actually remember what the last one that I DNF'd was. But I think it was a book called Bait. I think that's the last one I've officially taken a break from, and I'm not kind of thinking in my head I'm actually going to pick it up in a couple of days. But yeah, it's called Bait. I don't remember who it was by. It was a book that I discovered on TikTok. My friend sent me this very disturbing TikTok video. I am not going to include it because it was disturbing. And I decided that I wanted to read the book, and I have regrets. So this is a very dark, I don't know if it's very dark. This is a dark romance, taboo romance, BDSM romance about consensual non-consent. I have read another book featuring this kink, which is the first book in the Wicked Villain series. I can't remember what that book is actually called. Learn My Lesson, maybe? No, it's not called that. I don't know. I can't remember what that book is called. And I enjoyed that book a lot. I really liked that book. I did not enjoy Bait. So it's about this girl who has broken up with her boyfriend and has moved to this new city. I believe she's had a miscarriage, and so she's struggling to deal with that, as well as the kinks that she has. And she meets the male character on a chat room and they decide to live out this fantasy together. This book was uncomfortable. I did not enjoy this. I read a lot of romance, I read a lot of very smutty romance, and I read a lot of kinky romance, and I don't have a problem with reading about CNC, but this just grossed me out. It just, to be honest, it just grossed me out. I did not enjoy reading it. It was badly written. It was just horrible to read. Like, it was just a horrible reading experience. I got to like the first smutty scene and I was just like, I cannot, this is not a good time. And so I DNF'd it. I would not recommend anyone picks that book up. Usually I like to be like, you know, judge for yourself, but I don't think you should judge for yourself. I think you should listen to me and just read something different. If you are interested in reading like kinky romance, there are so many better books out there. I can recommend you some, just ask me. The next question is lunchtime. Tell us about your favourite book featuring food. This was a surprisingly easy one for me to answer because there is one book that I always think about the food in, and one day I would just love to do a video where I cook the food from this book because I just think it's iconic. I don't think it actually is iconic, but to me it is iconic, and that is Strange the Dreamer. Now, no one really talks about the food in this book, but it is there. There is a lot of discussion of food in this book. I can say I'm like quite sensitive to that kind of thing because I'm a massive foodie, like not because I get triggered, but I just love food so much. I love talking about food, eating food, cooking food, watching cooking programs. Like, food is my thing, books and food. So I really picked up on like a lot of the food references in here, and the food just sounds so good. The food that they have in Weep anyway sounds really good. Obviously the food that they have in the Sky, that's all I'm going to say about that place. The food that they have in the Sky is not as delicious, but yeah, maybe one day I will film that video. It will mean I have to reread this book, but that is not a problem. So Strange the Dreamer is obviously a very, very hyped book, especially on BookTube, and so you have probably already heard of this book, you probably already know what this is about, but I will just try and give a brief synopsis. So Strange the Dreamer is about a guy called Laszlo Strange who works as like an assistant in a library. He has this really deep interest in this, what is deemed to be anyway, a mythological city called Weep. He has been doing lots and lots of research on this, which most people think is just ridiculous. It's kind of akin to someone being super interested in Atlantis and doing lots of research and like collecting lots of academic material to kind of prove that Atlantis existed, which I don't think is something to make fun of. That sounds quite interesting to me, but anyway, a lot of the scholars at the library just think he's kind of a joke. And one day some travellers appear at the city and they are from Weep and they need help with a problem. With all his knowledge, of course, Laszlo ends up going with them and they end up on a beautiful adventure. This is one of my favourite books of all time, the second book in the series. I used to say it's my favourite book, but actually I think it has been recently bumped off of the top spot. I will tell you by which book a little bit later on. And the writing in this book is really beautiful and lyrical, and I think that's why the food stands out so much in this book, because it is described in graphic detail, which I love. The next question is Last Bell. What is the book that you most recently finished reading? I had to go back a little way to find this because, as I said, I've been not reading and DNFing and putting down a lot of things. So the last book that I actually finished reading was Broderick, and this is the second book in the Sabine Valley series by Katie Roberts. I believe this series is a very loose retelling of Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, but I have never seen that. I think it's a musical. I've never seen it, so I don't know if it actually is. So this series is set in Sabine Valley, which is a fictional city which is run by three separate like criminal family kind of thing. It's not like real world politics, so it's kind of hard to explain how it works, but it's a city split into three areas, 3 districts run by 3 separate families, 3 separate factions, whatever you want to call them. And the 7 brothers, were kicked out of their territory. They had been part of a ruling family. They'd been kicked out of their territory and they have now come back to reclaim it. And in doing so, they have enacted this ritual called a hand fasting ritual, where they marry someone from the opposing factions to cement their power. That might sound a bit complicated. That was quite hard to explain, but if you read the book, it seems to make perfect sense. I loved the first book in this series. I tend to really enjoy most of Katie Roberts' books actually, but I really enjoyed the first book in this series. Broderick is the second book, and I have to be honest, I was less keen on this one. So all of the books are polyamorous. They all have thruples, I think. And in this one we have Broderick, who is one of the brothers, and he is hand-fasted to Monroe, who is from the Amazon faction. She's like the successor to the throne, and Shiloh, who is his best friend. I was really invested in the relationship between Broderick and Shiloh, and not so much between Shiloh and Monroe, and between Broderick and Monroe. And whilst I usually love books that are polyamorous and have loved all of Katie Roberts' other books that are polyamorous, more so than the ones that were just like a straight couple, I didn't like it in this book, and I really just wanted it to be about Broderick and Shiloh. But that was a very personal thing. I still think it's a really good book, and I would still recommend this series if you're looking for something really, really smutty. The next question is homework. Tell us about the last non-fiction book that you enjoyed. So I do not read non-fiction. I have read 2 non-fiction books in the past maybe 10 years. One of them I did not finish, but I did finish one this year and I did enjoy it, and that was Fearing the Black Body. So this book is about the beauty standard and how basically white men have created the ideals of what is beautiful. It is called Fearing the Black Body, and there is some emphasis on specifically how people of colour are deemed to be unattractive, but actually it didn't, to me anyway, it didn't feel so much like that is what they were actually saying. It felt more like it was a book about how specifically white Christian men had used beauty to control women. That was kind of the message that I took from it, but there's a lot of different messages in there, so I think it's a really, really interesting book to read. The whole ideal of like what is beautiful is something that has always really intrigued me anyway, so for me this was like probably the one non-fiction book that has ever been written that actually suited my taste. So I would recommend it. However, I think if you're someone who doesn't read non-fiction, it might not be the easiest book to get into because it's quite dense, unless like me it's a subject that you are particularly interested in. The next question is staff room. Tell us about a book that you usually go to when you need to take a breath. I'm not really much of a rereader, so there isn't really a book in particular that I would go to if I needed like a break. But if I'm feeling tired mentally or physically, if I'm feeling slumpy, if I'm feeling like I just want to read something easy, then I will always go to romance, usually contemporary romance, sometimes fantasy, but usually contemporary romance, and it will usually be in the new adult kind of age range, always very smutty. For me, these books are usually, not always, but usually very fast paced, very easy for me to read, and they just make me feel good. Like I just usually leave them feeling relaxed and happy and like I'm ready to read some more. However, sometimes I get into a bit of a like rut with them and I cannot stop reading romance, and then I just have to like burn myself out until I can go on to a different genre. So we're now moving into the subject prompts. I am not going to do all of these, there's quite a lot. I did think about doing the same thing as Sylvie and just doing the subjects that I did at school, but I did a lot. I did something called the International Baccalaureate, so I did a lot of subjects, so that didn't really cut it down either. So I have just gone for the subject that I did my degree in, which is English, and then 2 of the subjects that I did at higher level for my International Baccalaureate. So the prompt for English is to tell you about one book that I studied and recommend one book that I think should be added to the curriculum. So the book that I'm going to talk about that I studied was one of the books that I did for my degree, and this is called The Lonely Londoners. This is a book written and set in the Windrush era, and it was written by I'm not sure if they were Jamaican, but they're definitely a Caribbean immigrant. It's about their experiences of being a new immigrant in the UK and the racism that they had to deal with. The book is set in the time that my grandmother would have come to the UK, and I'm getting emotional just talking about this, but I had a very emotional response to this book. Whilst of course racism is still a thing in the UK, it's definitely not as bad as some places in the world, we'll just say. And for me personally, I've been very fortunate that I haven't really had to deal with like a huge amount of racism. So it's something that's always been kind of quite far from my lived experience, but to read this book written in a voice that I've kind of grown up hearing, and written by somebody who is the same age as my grandmother, written in the time period that my grandmother came to the UK, just really like struck a chord with me. If you don't know about Windrush, it was I believe shortly after the Second World War, where a lot of people from the Caribbean, and I think some people from Africa as well, came to the UK with the idea that they were going to be embraced and loved by the British population for their contributions and their efforts during the war. This was not the reality, and they experienced a lot of racism. They found it difficult to get jobs, they found it difficult to get housing, and then since then there has been a big scandal with these people not being properly made British citizens and being asked to leave the UK, which fortunately my grandmother hasn't had to deal with any of that. I think this is a really important book. I'm kind of sad that I had to do a degree to hear about this book. This is a modern classic, but I've never heard of it. I think this is not the book that I'm using for a book that should be added to the school curriculum, but I definitely think it should be, because it's a big historical event. First of all, it's the voice of a person of colour and an immigrant into the UK, and I feel like it's a really big part of our history, but yet we just focus on reading like a lot of American literature and just like a lot of Shakespeare. And while Shakespeare is good, I don't think I needed to read quite as much Shakespeare as I did. Sorry if you love Shakespeare, but I don't. In regards to books that I think should be added to the curriculum, I am actually going to talk about 2. The first one I'm going to say is Bunny. The reason that I would like to see Bunny added to curriculums is very selfish, because I want there to be more analysis of the text of Bunny so that I can read it and understand it. I did try to begin doing my own. You'll see it's very heavily tabbed, but that's only like the first little section. It was very exhausting reading it like that. It's definitely a project I want to finish at some point, because I want to look at all of the different themes that are in this book, but I would prefer someone else do it for me, or at least like someone gives me a head start so I know what to really look for. But yeah, that's why I would like to see Bunny added to the curriculum. Bunny is a dark academia book, but it's very, very weird. It's about a girl called Samantha who is on a prestigious writing course, and she becomes kind of embroiled in this group of girls who have this kind of weird, dark magic about them, kind of. If you really want to understand the synopsis of this book, then you'll have to read it, because it's a weird one. a good one, but a weird one. The other book that I would love to see added to a school's curriculum, maybe a little bit controversial, but I would love to see Twilight added to schools' curriculums, because I just think there's a lot to unpick in Twilight. I think it was such a phenomenon that it's probably not going to go away anytime soon, and I really, personally anyway, I really think that we should have more modern tech in schools, because I think they open a lot more debate about things that are relevant to our lives at this moment in time. I also think it would help young people be a bit more interested in the topic. I mean, obviously I was always a reader, so I always loved English, but it was not a popular subject at my school. Like, it was popular because I went to a weird school where everyone was like an overachiever, and English being a core subject, like a lot of people wanted to do it, but a lot of people didn't enjoy English. And I think had we had more modern books that we were looking at, I think it would have helped people enjoy it more. As I said, I think there's a lot to unpick in Twilight. I think we could talk about the lack of diversity in it. There's some weird shit about vampires all being white. I think that's interesting to unpick. There's sexual morality in Twilight as well, which I think, again, interesting. There could be discussions around age gap relationship. There's the representation of Indigenous Americans and the, what is the word I'm looking for? The mysticism of them. I don't think that's quite right, but hopefully you get what I mean. I just think you could have a lot of really interesting debates with young people just purely using Twilight as your base text. And I just think it would be really exciting and really interesting for young people in an English class. So let me know your thoughts on that, because I think I'm onto something. So the next subject I've gone for is science, and for this the question is, which book couple do you think has the best chemistry? This was actually quite difficult for me because I don't think I've read a lot of books where I think the attraction, the chemistry between the characters is like really natural and really they just want each other. And I've read a lot of romance, and often I just feel like I can see the author's mind working to create chemistry between these two characters. I think there are two books that I've read where I just really felt the romance between them. The first one is Punk 57, which is a bully romance, but I do feel like the attraction between Misha and Ryan was really well written, and I felt their chemistry. Punk 57 is probably one of the most famous independently published romances, at least in the bookish community, and it is about two people, Misha and Ryan, who were pen pals at school as part of like a project, and they decided to keep in contact and basically became best friends. But after a tragedy happens to Misha, he cuts contact with Ryan until one day he turns up at her school. Another book that I feel like the characters just had really natural chemistry is That Guy on the Left or Right. I think it's That Guy on the Left. There'll be a picture so you can see which one I mean. This is a romance between two characters, Lainey and Theo, and this is actually a friends to lovers book, which I'm not interested in reading, but this one is perfection. I know we love enemies to lovers, but this friends to lovers book is just gorgeous. We have Theo, who is kind of like a bit nerdy, a bit socially inexperienced, and Lainey, who is on a mission to stay away from bad boys. They strike up a friendship, and they end up starting this Instagram page which is all about like living life to the fullest, and slowly over time that friendship turns into something more. This book has probably like one of my favorite sex scenes of all time. Like I think the chemistry was so real between the two characters that when they finally like got down to it, it was just hot. But yeah, 2 books with great chemistry. And the final subject that I'm going to talk about is geography. This was initially what I wanted to do at university. I did do it for 1 year. And the prompt for this is a book with a strong sense of place or great world building. And for this, I have gone with my new favourite book, Piranesi. This book is basically all world building. Whilst it definitely has a plot and a story, the majority of this book is world building, which works for me. It's so atmospheric. This book is set in I guess technically this is a portal fantasy, but this book is set in like a pocket world, and this world is called The House. Piranesi lives in the house. This book is written in kind of a diary format, and it's all about Piranesi's explorations of the house. So there is a lot of description. It's very much like a Greek temple or a Roman temple. I don't know architecture, so I don't know the difference. But you really get a sense of what it would look like in there because his descriptions are so detailed. And I know that sounds really boring, but it's not. In regards to the plot of this book, it's kind of a mystery, not the plot, the genre. We are basically uncovering who Piranesi is, who the other is, which is the other person that lives at the house, and where he is and how he got there. We end up learning that a lot faster than Piranesi, and so that makes it a really tense read, and therefore it's also really fast paced despite it being mainly description. So I hope I've done a good job of explaining this. I don't think I have, but honestly it's my favourite book. I've read it twice now. I've read it once this year, once last year, and I really want to read it again before the year is over. It's a very atmospheric, very autumnal read. It's not really spooky, but it's kind of got a bit of a creepy atmosphere, so it's definitely a good like October read going into November as well, because it's not technically spooky. So I will definitely be trying to get one more read of this book before the end of the year. Also, one last note about this book is I read this book both times within 24 hours. That's how good it is. So those are all the prompts that I will be covering in this video. I will link Sylvie and Victoria's channels down below, so please go and check them out as well. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Please let me know your thoughts on any of these books in the comments down below and give me a thumbs up too. Please subscribe if you want to see more from me in the future, and hopefully you'll come back and see me in another video soon. Bye!